Welcome to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Youth ministries rise and fall on the volunteers, so we are here to encourage and equip you. Join the conversation as we tackle the practical questions you are asking so you can help the next generation know Jesus.
All right, everybody, I've got Garth Friesen here. Garth, this is so fun for you to be sharing with our youth workers because you are one of the experts, I would say, in our country at this point. In terms of like long-term youth ministry, the groups is kind of a smaller group, and you've been at this for a while in equipping not just volunteer youth workers, although that's who we're going to talk to today, but vocational youth workers. You've raised up a bunch of youth pastors, and you've been doing this for a few years, let's say, right? Why don't you fill people in? What is it that you get to do, and how long have you been at it?
Yeah, I have been a youth ministry prof since 2003 here in Steinbach Bible College, and which is mind-blowing to think about it because I still feel like I'm in my 30s, but that's clearly not the case anymore.
Yeah, and it's wild, like, to be doing the training, and then you've got your ministry experience before that even, but like for over 20 years, you've been preparing for the sake of ministry for the church, you know, youth pastors, you know, and that have ended up all around the world. And so what a gift. And yet what a cool thing to do for 2 decades. Yeah. Yeah. Except you feel old. That's the only downside. Warn you about that part. Yeah. So for people that maybe don't know, tell them about where Steinbach Bible College is. Where's Steinbach? And what is your current role? I know it's probably changed a little bit over the years, but what is it now that you do with the college? And what does that kind of look like for you?
When I was hired, I mean, I was tasked to train camp workers and youth ministry workers, whether they're youth pastors or whatever. I happen to have a gift for music, so they actually got me to doing some worship stuff as well. Thankfully, I've been able to streamline a little bit more and focus more on youth and camp ministry. But I think what's changed the most is that I've walked alongside my own kids as they've gone through youth ministry. I have 2 adult children now. My last child is 17 years old in high school. And so he's still a part of the youth group that I volunteer at. One of the biggest joys is that I actually get to work alongside people that I've trained. So our current youth pastor is someone that I've trained, walked alongside and mentored. And every Tuesday we lead a Bible study together. We take turns, and I get to walk alongside youth as well. So that's kind of the beauty of it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And Phil, so Steinbach is in Manitoba.
Yes.
How do you usually describe it? Like, do you, like this far away from Winnipeg, or this far away from this grain silo? How does it work?
It's about 40 minutes from Winnipeg. It still is a small town feel, but we have traffic. Like it is a city, and a little bit annoying compared to when I first moved here, where I could get from one end of the city to the other, no problem. But now there's waits and whatnot. So yeah, I mean it's in an area that is known for Christianity and deep giving, and yet the culture here has changed dramatically, like it has all across Canada. And so not all my students look the same. There's a diversity that's in the classroom, which I actually love, and about 10% of our population is international. So that's also very cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right, so let's dive into this main conversation. People kind of know from the show notes and from the title, but you came around on the YWC, our conferences, and a couple locations. You brought this breakout on blind spots, which kind of is what sparked this conversation. Because we're not going to. You've got great content on it, and if you want to hear it, you should go to a conference near you. And but outside of that, this conversation about blind spots, I think for those of us in ministry, as volunteers, as point leaders, is something we often think that somebody else needs. For any of us that were like, I wish somebody else could hear this kind of thing because, man, we're volunteering and it's like, yeah, that point leader, like they're just not quite self-aware. They just don't ask, and they don't allow us to invite, feedback to them, or, this would be so much better if this person. Is that kind of what you experience? Like, do you see that in the 20 years as you've prepared people? Have you kind of seen like, oh yeah, this is like a somebody else problem? Does that resonate?
Yeah, that's why people sign up for it. I mean, it's the other person with the problem. And admittedly, even when I created this workshop, I had an issue with another person who I felt was micromanaging me. And I'm like, what can I do to deal with that person? And as I did the research and dove into it, I came back with the question, okay, so if they have that issue, what about me? I can't control them, especially if they're in a position of power, but I can control my own actions, or at least attempt to, and get some help with that. So that's kind of the birthplace, and actually where I take people through that whole workshop is I let them know what is this whole thing called blind spots, what I define it, what actually is it, and I mean, it's essentially the failure to see reality as it is, and you don't necessarily know that you're micromanaging another person, or being super defensive, or whatever that struggle is. You don't actually necessarily know that until someone confronts you and says, hey, by the way, when you speak in that way, and you're married, Jeremy, so you have someone who tells you about your blind spots all the time, just like I do. My wife, Wendy, calls me on stuff, and it is so easy for me. Well, I'm this way because, right? We do the blame shift type of thing. And so I see that same thing with ministry leaders, is that, yeah, it's the other person with the problem. I'm going through this anxiety, this struggle, or this whatever. I'm losing my job because of them, and not taking ownership of their own stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody, I forget where it comes from. It's obviously not me. I'm not this smart, but that we measure other people based on their behaviors. We measure ourselves based on our motives. And obviously almost we need to flip that in some ways. And then blind spots. Okay. So, what are some of the, thinking about, you won't tell like individuals, but like just generically some stories or some ideas, what kind of blind spots do youth workers usually see or experience? And again, in a second, we'll kind of move to like, okay, what does it mean to create a culture where we can catch these things? But, when you think about, again, just the trajectory that you've had in ministry, preparing people, whether it be volunteers or staff people, what are some of the blind spots that often folks have and they don't even realize it? Because it's a blind spot. I guess that's the definition.
Yeah.
But we can see it in other people because we could see to their blind spots. What are some of the things that we're kind of thinking about?
Yeah. Even in the workshop, the way I set it up is I ask the participants, like, what are some of those things that irk you about other people? Those are clearly seen by you. And often those things that annoy you about other people are actually things that you yourself struggle with. So if you have, let's say, some sibling rivalry and you say your brother or your sister always does this, you may actually struggle with that as well. But you see it from your lens. And so, there's three basic types. You have your knowledge blind spots, thinking you know more or you know less than you actually do. Or it could be emotional.
Oh, that's interesting. Could be a blind spot that you actually know less?
Yes. Yeah, I know. That's bizarre, eh? Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, I can't do that. That's a senior pastor's job. That's beyond me. Like, sort of passing the buck. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one, because I think for volunteers, a lot of times I've heard that from volunteers. Oh, I don't know enough to be able to talk about, this with my students. And it's like, well, if you've been following Jesus for more than a few minutes, you probably actually know what it means to die to yourself. You know what it means to struggle, with the idea that there's sinfulness at war within you. And you might actually know more than you do. But yeah, that could be a very clear. That's interesting. That not blind spot could be thinking you know less than you actually do. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, honestly, yeah, that's something that actually affected me not too long ago when it came to a spiritual warfare incident, which is a whole nother discussion in itself. But I was in a situation where I definitely need to rely on the Holy Spirit more than I had ever had to rely on in the past. And I felt the Holy Spirit leading me and guiding me to passages in Scripture that I honestly didn't know I knew. And through the work of God, I was able to go to those passages and work in this situation. So, yeah. It happens to all of us. In my profession as a professor, thinking you know more, than you actually do, I see all the time in students. The person who's an expert in this particular part of theology or whatever, right? Yeah. And I've always tried to be humble with the stuff that I know, and try to teach that humility with people. Yet we do need experts. We need people who do know their stuff, right? Yeah. The second one would be the emotion thing, and oh man. I mean, we all have made those decisions. Let's say when you get cut off in traffic and you honk the horn, or the person flips you that bird and you feel like doing the same thing back, right? So like our emotions are actually a really bad place to make decisions from, right? And yet God's given them to us for a reason. So those emotional blind spots are a reality. So having a bad temper or overly emotional, those kinds of things.
Which we would see. So, I mean, again, volunteers listening, again, you think about your, maybe it's your point leader, maybe it's your senior pastor, maybe it's just somebody else, another volunteer, and their emotional, could I say it this way? Maybe it's their emotional stability. They don't have enough of it. And because of that, you end up having to, act a certain way around them because you're kind of like on eggshells, or you don't want to set that off, or whatever it might be. Yeah, that can easily be something that you see in other people. Okay, so yeah, emotional stuff, knowledge stuff.
And then the final one's behavior. So when we don't see our own behavior clearly or objectively, it's the classic. A big push in the last number of years has been obviously keeping our students safe. So we do the side hug rather than the full hug for obvious reasons, right? But that behavior piece is what often gets leaders in trouble too, like how you behave with the people that you're ministering to, or how you treat your volunteers, those types of things. And so we don't always necessarily see what the other person's perceiving, and we might not be intending to do whatever that thing is, right? So that would be the third sort of type.
Yeah, and it could be like big, like, think about behaviors as like something that's big, or like a giant thing, or it could just be like, hey, you've got somebody that when they get up to like run the game, like they don't realize it, but they're just so confusing. And like, this is this weird blind spot where you're like, why are they so confusing? And they're not motivational. They're not excited about what they're doing. Or it could be something, as simple as like, that interaction, like they're just awkward. And I don't think they realize it, but they're just so awkward in the lobby when they talk with other people. So like the range on those kinds of things is obviously wild. Okay, so this is something we see in other people. Obviously there's a sense that maybe this is something within us. When you realize like, maybe these blind spots are causing us or hampering us from being able to do our ministry. I know you talk a lot, Garth, about the idea of creating this culture of like feedback. And so what does it mean? And this is kind of where this is the point of this conversation, trying to give us all like some action steps on what does it mean to create a culture of feedback? How do you actually do that? Not just for the sake of the person that we see a blind spot in, but maybe even for the sake of ourselves, that we could catch things that we're missing. What even as a volunteer could we do to start to move into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of us are familiar with Scripture that talks about this idea of self-examination. Psalms talks about it. 1 Corinthians 9 talks about this idea of disciplining yourself like an athlete, training. To do it from a place where you're not going to get disqualified from ministry. Paul's pretty blunt on that, right? And he says, like, you want to be above board. And so blind spots in Scripture are those things that hinder us and trip us up in life. And so finding a person in your life that can help give you perspective, I think, is one of the biggest things that you can do. I am a blunt type of person. I grew up in a bit of a Dutch Mennonite type of a culture where you kind of just sort of say things sometimes. So things happen. And one of my coworkers isn't as blunt as I am. And so after, let's say, a faculty meeting, I'll often go to him and I'll ask him, hey, was I too blunt in what I said? Like, do I need to apologize for something that I said? And so he kind of helps give me that perspective and say, yeah, you need to apologize. You were a jerk in that moment. And in his case, we flipped it around. He often isn't bold enough in saying the things that he needs to say. And so I will help him in that regard, kind of push him to make sure that he's being heard out. When I go back to like a youth ministry context, we have a lot of rookies that are on our team, and so they need that feedback as well. And so if you can actually build in some of that feedback into your meetings, whether it's those one-on-one type of meetings or having some sort of a mentoring relationship with your volunteers, whether it's you as the youth pastor or someone else, in the church, I think that would be just a really wise tool to use, right? Mm-hmm. So, I meet regularly with our youth pastor, and I provide feedback to her, and I get feedback from her too when I'm leading Bible study or whatever. And just this last Tuesday, we had a wrap up from our series of Bible studies that we were doing. And so our youth pastor, Jory, was just like, hey, so what worked, what didn't work with our participants? And they gave feedback, right? What are the things that you liked? What are the things you didn't like, right? So I think if you can create that in your culture, you've already done a lot more than a lot of churches have, to be honest.
So that's interesting. Even just that one question. So yeah, what was working there? What wasn't working? Because I think, not that it's not that you obviously can ask, the question, hey, did you like this? Did you not like this? But did this work kind of presupposes that we're trying to do something, that there was a purpose behind what we were doing. And did we actually accomplish it? And that moves the conversation to being a little bit more objective. It's not necessarily personal. It's like, hey, was what I was doing working because of, in light of what I was trying to see have happen? So that question for like volunteers, if they're asking that kind of question, and letting other people speak into it, yes, that really is a fascinating thing that would open up, I'm sure, lots that I could learn, but then also potentially, if this becomes the nature of how we do things around here, yeah, we always kind of ask the question, does this work? Does this not work? Then other people might start asking that question too. Are there other questions that you use when you're thinking about trying to generate feedback or create like helpful feedback? Because that's the other thing. Like, so sometimes you preach, I preach. If you ask somebody like feedback and the question is like, obviously you can steer questions like, how great was the message that I just preached? And you're like, oh, that's a terrible question, right? So sometimes the nature of how we ask things can be really helpful. What are some other ways or other questions you might use?
Well, again, it's going to be person dependent somewhat. Like I already know some of my struggles that I have are some of my blind spots, in part because I'm married and my wife has let me know, in part because I've gotten that feedback from others. So there's a number of tools that you can do. Before we go there, I want to mention a book. So there's a book by Tasha Eurich, and it's called Insight. And so she did a lot of this research into blind spots and whatnot. And so she shares the stat that 95% of people think they are self-aware, but only 10 to 15% truly are. So just let that sit a little bit, right? And so what I do is, obviously, Jeremy, you and I are part of that 10 to 15% that are truly aware of our blind spot.
Everybody listening, yeah, we're the ones that there's the crazies around us, but we see everything. Yeah.
But in reality, we all struggle with it. So even if you've pressed into this, right, and you say, oh yeah, this is my struggle, or that's my struggle, and I want to touch on it. So I honestly think you need to do some good heart work and some good introspection. And so what Tasha basically goes with, she suggests that we need both internal self-awareness, which is, the extent to how well you know yourself, and we also need external self-awareness. So those are those voices that are speaking into you, like what we were talking about. And so this is where it gets interesting. And honestly, the people who take this workshop, this is honestly all they care about is like the tools. They just want this. And they're like, why do you take so long to get here? And I go, well, we need to actually lay out what are those blind spots before we actually can talk about them. Because if you don't even know what they are, why am I going to give you tools? So that's why I'm a little hesitant to say, hey, let's just jump over to these tools here. They're important, these tools. Mm-hmm. But first off, are you actually pointing them at yourself? Or are you still thinking about that leader who micromanages you or uses their knowledge to kind of push you down, right? So what are those?
And maybe just on that note too, like I think one of the things about feedback and creating that feedback culture and asking those questions is that it kind of does help, I think, for any of us move in the direction of, obviously I don't know what I don't know, and so if I have a blind spot, part of the challenge is the only way is if somebody else can point a light on it. And so if I'm inviting that with different questions or whatnot, I might be able to discern it. But it is also like challenging. So I just think so yesterday, or I guess, yeah, it was yesterday. No, 2 days ago. I got a chance to hang out with my friend Dave. Have you met Dave Steves actually?
No. I don't think so.
Dave Steves. So he was my youth pastor growing up. But then we became friends afterwards. We worked together. He's the best man at my wedding. And so Dave's is the character where I know if I ask him for feedback, like it's going to be really personal and it's going to be really not sharp. Like it comes, like it's fine. He loves me. I love him. But we're going to go right to it. But it started with the first time, and we shared the story because there were some other people around, the first time that he gave me message feedback on a content I was delivering. And it was so scathing. And I was actually kind of prepared for it, so I was okay. But if you're not careful when you start asking questions, if people are honestly truthful with you and you've not experienced this thing before, it can be devastating because you realize like, I didn't know. And because I didn't know and I wasn't ready for this, like, does everybody know this about me? Like that I come across as abrasive, or does everybody know that I pick my nose in public and I don't realize people know? Like that kind of stuff. You're like, holy cow. And so sometimes the questions we can ask if we're wading into it, it starts us in that direction and then allows us to maybe take baby steps so that we'll be comfortable with somebody telling us, hey, yeah, you actually do pick your nose so that you know. And we'll receive that and it'll be helpful for us. But it might take us a bit to get to that point.
So, okay, I'll start going into some of these tools. I think the one that really jumped out at me from the reading of Tasha Urich's book was this idea called the dinner of truth. And this is you taking someone out for supper that, I mean, it could be a really close friend that you trust. It could be a coworker. It could be your wife. It could be your mentor, whoever that person is that you trust. And, you take them out for nachos or have you seen the YouTube series Hot Ones?
Yeah, of course.
People have the hot wings and they progressively get hotter. And these famous people are grilled with these questions. It's that kind of idea where you take someone out for a meal and you just lay down this question. What is it about me that you find annoying or you think I could work on? And so being vulnerable enough to ask someone, hey, what are those things in me that need to change, right? That is actually the question that David asks at the end of Psalm 139, coincidentally. So, is there anything in me that needs to change? After he raves, do you remember that? Like, I will hate the wicked, these are people that are against you. And but then he transitions to this idea, hey, what is it in me that needs to change, right? Mm. And so having the guts to do something like that, it doesn't have to be over a meal. But this is the clarifier that Tasha Eurich basically says. You are not able to respond in defensiveness and response. You just hear those words, maybe you write it down and just let it sit and think it. What a lot of relationship experts talk about is when we get heated or anxious, we stop to think. We're not able to process well. We don't actually hear the things that are coming at us. So this idea of being calm in that moment is part of the secret to actually hearing that.
And I'm sure that sometimes takes practice or like if you for the first time somebody's giving you feedback on something, you can become really heated. You're like, why can't I calm down? It's just, this is a nature of trying this kind of thing out. What kind of questions would you ask as you kind of get into that kind of thing? So yeah, you're sitting with somebody and you're like, okay, I'm creating a culture of feedback. I want, for my own benefit, for the benefit of our organization as a youth worker, like I'm asking my co-leader, I'm asking my point leader, so it's like, hey, how did that work? If it was like your leadership, maybe like how I led that small group, that kind of stuff. Did that work? Did it not? What are some other things that you might ask in those kinds of conversations, especially for somebody that's doing feedback for the first time?
Yeah. Okay. So the most simple thing to do, you've heard of this exercise, the SWOT exercise: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. That would be a kind of a great kind of overlay for looking at those kinds of questions. That when I'm thinking specifically of a youth ministry situation, this is a youth ministry volunteer or youth pastor who wants to evaluate their program. That is a great. So what are the things that are working? What are the things that aren't working? What are some of our opportunities? Where are we missing? Are we actually connecting with parents? That'd be a great question to explore. Or what are some of the potential threats? Are we setting ourselves up for failure by not following the policy that we've set out? Right? Are we driving home kids in our own vehicle as opposed to what our plan is, our plan to protect our kids? What does that look like? So that's maybe more generic.
That's really helpful though, because I think that's interesting. Like if you ask questions about, hey, just as a small group leader, hey, if you're asking a co-leader, you're asking your point leader, hey, what are some of my strengths as a volunteer in this ministry? And then when you get response, usually it's like, oh, you're so good at being kind to the students. The follow-up, I would suggest, is tell me more. Tell me more is always going to be your kind of go-to, I would say, so that I can understand how to replicate that. So this also, if you're a communicator, this is like the classic. If you communicate a lot, people come up to you afterwards and they're like, oh, that's a great message. Sometimes you just receive and you're like, hey, thanks, that's great. But sometimes if the person is actually thoughtful, the question is, well, what made it good? What was helpful about it? How did it connect? Why do you think it worked? And then you get to the things so that you can replicate. And the heart behind it is like, because I want to keep doing those things. I want to make sure I don't change those things. And so understanding strengths and actually really understanding them, because your strength can actually be your blind spot. Like there's so many people, they don't realize, oh, you're actually incredibly helpful in this regard. But they've got no sweet clue of it. And so what a gift to kind of learn that. So I love that. Yeah. Weaknesses. That's really good. Yeah. Okay. Keep going. Is there other stuff, or do you want to expand on that?
Well, just as you were saying, I thought I did this cool thing. I invited some of my youth groups, some of my grade 12s to join, my class I was teaching, called Directing Adolescent Spirituality. And I wanted my students to ask them, hey, so what makes a good youth worker? Like, what are the things that you appreciate? And so my youth, stepped up to the plate and shared all those good things. And my youth wanted to know in advance, like, what the questions were. But I'm one of those people that's a little spontaneous. And so I threw another question at them, and I ended up stepping in it a little bit. So I said, what are times when a youth worker isn't doing a good job? And one of the guys that I've been mentoring, he says, it's like when you guys talk too much when we're doing the Bible, or like the questions after, when you go into professor mode. And my students are all like, at first they're like frozen, and then they start to laugh, and I'm laughing too, right? Isn't that kind of wild? Like, I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
I'm paid to speak. You're paid to speak, right? And so often we can monopolize conversations and not actually hear that other person and give them that listening space. So a simple question is, are you talking too much?
Yeah. Wow.
Are you actually hearing from them? And so after hearing that feedback in my classroom, as humiliating as it was, here I am, the expert, right? And hey, there's a corrective that I need to make, and I'm leading these Bible studies. I got to make sure I'm not telling them all the answers, right? Mm-hmm. And this is what I often see in youth ministry with youth pastors all over the place, is that, or even pastors, they provide all the oh wow kind of moments and don't let the participants, the students, actually engage and participate and find those nuggets of truth within the passage, right? So yeah. I think from there, we're looking at feedback from other people. Those truth-telling friends, there's a variety of ways that you can get them to have that feedback in your life. But if they're not in those situations, they're not going to actually be able to give you a good perspective. So you almost need to invite people that are there with you when you are leading, when you are teaching. So this workshop that I did, the whole blind spots workshop, I was helping with worship at YWC, and the guitar player, who's one of my best friends, asked if he could come to the workshop. And I said, yes, come to the workshop, and I want you to give feedback. What do you like? What do you don't like? So isn't that hilarious? So here I have this workshop on blind spots, and I got feedback on the things that were good, the things that weren't good, and he provided me with some great insights. As someone who isn't even in youth ministry, right? He's in the business world as an engineer, and so super helpful, right?
That's great. I love that so much. Okay, so we've got some questions. This is good. As we kind of come towards the end here, I want you just to give a sense of, if we do these kinds of things, how does this shift and change the culture of our ministry? Because sometimes as volunteers, even as point leaders, we wonder like, I don't have the power to change everything, or, I'm not. And the idea of asking questions actually is a pretty straightforward, simple way to start to move the needle on the culture. And so can you just speak to how this could actually benefit if we were thoughtful in this regard? How does this benefit the overall organization, our youth ministries, but maybe even beyond that?
Well, I mean, we even know this from the research on the whole sticky faith thing in the States, and we did a hemorrhaging faith study a number of years ago here in Canada. There's been a few studies since that as well. But one of the big ideas was that youth who stuck with the faith were given a space where they were heard, where they were able to ask questions of their leaders. So at our church and at the college that I work at, we've tried to create a culture of question asking. So we actually start a lot of our sessions in our youth. This is not necessarily just with the leaders, but with our youth themselves. What are some questions you have from our youth leaders? So we have our youth leaders on a panel. They're on the stage, and there's the most random questions that are asked. And one of the guys that I mentor as well, he always asks the same question: "What's your favorite genre of music?" Okay, whatever. It's his thing, right? But sometimes through that, we get some really, really hard questions, often a lot of relationship questions, those types of things. So I think it starts there. It actually starts in your youth ministry, where you actually are creating that culture where people can ask anything. It's a safe place to ask hard questions. And then we also do that with our leader meetings. And then the people who are mentoring, our youth pastors, the people who are in my life, that there are those that we create that space for those questions. And so basically you are creating a culture of question asking, of revealing kind of those hard things, of feedback, by modeling that way as a leader. And I think being vulnerable and saying, hey, what is it that I could do better? So even just going back to my workshop and asking my friend to say, hey, participate in the workshop. What is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? What are some ways that I could change it? Right? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love this so much, Garth. All right, gives us a few handles, and as volunteers, listen, you could do this week. If you're on your way to a program, by all means, you could leverage some of these kinds of questions right away. And if people want to follow up, Garth, I think there's lots of youth workers or potential youth workers even listening that should find their way to Steinbach. And some of them will have to look it up first. But to learn from you at Steinbach Bible College, why don't you fill people in? We can link this all in the show notes if they want to jump in. Are there some places for some young youth workers to come and hang out with you? Would that be all right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm available on Instagram or even Facebook, although I'm not on there a whole lot. But email or even a phone call would work.
That's awesome. And then the school, we'll link the school because, again, they should fill in your program. They should sign up. It's a wonderful spot. You guys continue to graduate some of the sharpest people and launch them into ministry, which is such a gift for our country because we need more vocational youth workers across the board. So I'm guessing you would take an extra applicant or two if people were interested.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think we could always use more students, and I keep getting calls from churches. Hey, do you have any students? And my response to them says, yeah, but they're actually often have jobs before they graduate, which is wild in itself. That wasn't that way 20 years ago. And so I often recommend churches to actually send me some students, and I can send some back. Like it needs to go both ways. And I think that would be a whole nother podcast, would just be looking at kind of that crisis of leadership and filling those gaps. I'll actually give you a little tease here. I actually don't think it's a crisis of leadership. It's a crisis of discipleship. We need to disciple better. So, that starts in youth group. And I feel that my church and what we do at the college, we are actually doing some really good things in that regard. So, the issue of leadership in the church in Canada, can be solved by youth workers, and that's for sure as we disciple them. Okay, any last words, Garth, before we bring this to a close? Well, I just encourage people to do the hard work of asking those questions of yourself, rather than just pointing your fingers at other people. Point them towards yourself. Invite other people into your story. Try to do it in a way where you're not defensive. And I will, my own experience, that's super hard to do. But when we are defensive, we go into blame mode, which goes right back to the garden, and that's not helpful. So yeah, awesome. I love Youth Worker Conference, and I'll be at a few of them again this next year. So hoping I can connect with more of your listeners as well.
I love it. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast.